The whirring of the security camera feed on Ethan Carter's laptop was a sound he had grown accustomed to. As the co-owner of a small tech company specializing in home surveillance systems, Ethan often used his own house as a testing ground for the latest updates. He had installed top-of-the-line cameras around his property, partly out of habit, and partly because his work often blurred into his personal life. But on this particular evening, what was meant to be a routine test turned into something far more unsettling. Ethan sat in his home office, tinkering with new motion detection algorithms. His wife, Alyssa, had gone to bed early, citing a headache. It wasn't unusual. She often retired early these days, leaving Ethan to work late into the night. As he skimmed through footage from the previous week, looking for examples of false positives to refine the system, something caught his attention. A figure moving in the backyard at 11:42 p.m. At first, Ethan thought it was an animal, a stray cat or perhaps one of the raccoons that occasionally wandered onto their property. But as he zoomed in, his chest tightened. The shape was unmistakably human. The camera's infrared setting cast the figure in shades of gray, making it difficult to discern details, but Ethan could clearly see a man climbing over the back fence. The figure moved with an air of familiarity, as though he knew exactly where he was going. Ethan frowned, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. He switched to the camera overlooking the side of the house and watched as the man approached the living room window. Alyssa had left it open. The man hoisted himself up, slipping through the window with practiced ease. Ethan's stomach churned as he switched to the interior camera. The feed showed the man landing softly on the carpet before pausing, as if listening for any signs of movement. Ethan froze, his heart pounding. This wasn't a random intruder. The man moved with a confidence that suggested he knew the layout of the house. And then he disappeared from view, heading down the hallway toward the master bedroom. Ethan's mind raced as he stared at the screen, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Had Alyssa seen him? Had she called the police? He pulled out his phone and opened the security app, which gave him live access to the cameras. His finger hovered over the button to activate the alarm system, but something stopped him. A gnawing sense of dread, coupled with a faint hope that there might be an explanation for what he was witnessing. He switched to the hallway camera just in time to see the man reappear. This time, he wasn't alone. Alyssa stood beside him, her hair disheveled and her expression relaxed, even affectionate. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. The man leaned in, whispering something to Alyssa, who laughed softly before pulling him by the hand back toward the bedroom. Ethan's hands clenched into fists as he watched them disappear from view, the bedroom door closing behind them. For a moment, he sat frozen, his mind unable to process what he had just seen. Alyssa, the woman he had loved, trusted, and built a life with, was having an affair. And it wasn't just happening behind his back, it was happening under his roof. Ethan sat in the glow of his computer screen, his mind a storm of disbelief and anger. The image of Alyssa leading another man into their bedroom replayed over and over, like a cruel loop he couldn't escape. For several minutes, he simply stared at the paused footage. The timestamp glared at him, 11:45 p.m., just hours earlier. His chest tightened as he realized Alyssa was likely still asleep, or pretending to be, just a few doors down. He needed answers. Ethan switched back to the live feed, scanning each camera angle for any sign of the man. The bedroom camera hadn't been installed. Alyssa had objected to the idea, calling it an invasion of privacy. He relented at the time, not wanting to upset her. Now, he regretted that decision. Moving to the exterior feeds, he rewound the footage again, this time watching the man's exit. At 1:08 a.m., the bedroom door creaked open, and the man emerged. Alyssa followed him, her hand briefly brushing his arm as they whispered in hushed tones. Ethan turned up the volume, but their voices were too soft to catch. The man retraced his steps, slipping back out through the open window. Alyssa closed it behind him and locked it, her movements calm and deliberate. She didn't seem worried about being seen. She didn't even check for cameras. As the man disappeared into the night, Ethan's stomach churned. This wasn't the first time. The ease, the familiarity, they had done this before. Ethan couldn't sit idle any longer. He stood, his pulse pounding in his ears, and made his way down the hallway. The house was eerily quiet, save for the faint hum of the air conditioning. When he reached the bedroom door, he paused, his hand hovering over the knob. He thought about barging in, demanding an explanation. But what would that accomplish? He didn't want to give Alyssa the chance to deflect, to twist the situation before he had all the facts. Instead, he turned and went back to the office. By morning, Ethan had pieced together a plan. He would confront Alyssa, but only after gathering enough information to leave her no room for denial. The security footage was one thing, but he needed more. Proof that couldn't be explained away as a misunderstanding. He spent the next few days monitoring the cameras obsessively, paying close attention to Alyssa's schedule. Her excuses about late-night yoga classes and girls' nights out now took on a sinister meaning. Each evening, Ethan watched as she left the house, checking the cameras to confirm her destination. On 2 occasions, she drove to the same cafe where the man from the footage, her lover, was waiting for her. Ethan's suspicions were further confirmed when he found a receipt in Alyssa's purse for a boutique hotel downtown, dated a week prior. The receipt bore both their names, an attempt, no doubt, to avoid suspicion. But the thought of Alyssa registering the room under Ethan's last name made his blood boil. He took photos of the receipt, compiling it with the security footage and screenshots of text messages he'd found on Alyssa's phone while she showered. Alyssa, I can't wait to see you tonight. He won't suspect a thing. Unknown. Same place as usual? Alyssa, yes. Come through the back. Ethan's emotions ranged from rage to heartbreak as he gathered each piece of evidence. The woman he had built a life with, the person he trusted above all else, had betrayed him in the most personal way imaginable. But despite the pain, a new resolve began to take shape. Ethan wasn't just going to confront her. He was going to make her face the full weight of her actions. One evening, after Alyssa left for what she claimed was a last-minute work meeting, Ethan set his plan into motion. He waited until she was gone before carefully packing a few essentials, enough to last a couple of nights, and setting the house's alarm system to notify him if anyone else entered. He wouldn't be there when she came home. Not yet. First, he needed time to process and finalize his next steps. That night, Ethan stayed at a small motel on the outskirts of town, poring over the evidence he had collected. As much as he wanted to confront Alyssa immediately, he knew his anger could cloud his judgment. When his phone buzzed at 11:30 p.m., his heart sank. It was the house alarm system. Someone had entered through the back window. Ethan pulled up the live feed, watching as the man from the footage, Alyssa's lover, let himself in. This time, Ethan wasn't going to let it slide. Ethan gripped the steering wheel tightly as he sped back toward his house. The live feed on his phone showed the man slipping into the back window, the same route he'd taken before. Alyssa was already inside, her voice faintly audible as she greeted her lover. It was the second time this week. And this time, Ethan wasn't going to watch from afar. When he pulled into the driveway, he turned off the engine and sat in silence for a moment. His heart pounded at his chest as he weighed his options. He could burst in, confronting them in a storm of rage. Or he could remain calm, methodical, and ensure that Alyssa had no way of deflecting the truth. He chose the latter. Ethan pulled out his phone, switched to the app controlling the home's lighting, and turned on every light in the house. Inside, Alyssa and her lover froze as the sudden brightness flooded the rooms. Ethan stepped out of the car and strode toward the front door, his phone still in hand. When he entered, he heard hurried whispers and the sound of footsteps retreating down the hall. Ethan closed the door behind him, locking it with a deliberate click. "Alyssa," he called out, his voice calm but cold. "I think it's time we talked." No response. Ethan walked into the living room, where Alyssa stood near the couch, her face pale. The man was nowhere in sight, but Ethan could hear the faint creak of the floorboards upstairs. "Where is he?" Ethan asked, his tone icy. "Ethan, I can explain," Alyssa stammered, her hands trembling as she gestured vaguely. "Don't," Ethan cut her off, holding up a hand. "Don't insult me by pretending this is something it's not." Alyssa opened her mouth to respond, but the sound of a door opening upstairs stopped her. The man appeared at the top of the staircase, his expression a mix of defiance and discomfort. "You must be the husband," the man said, his voice casual, as though they were meeting at a social event. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Get out of my house," he said evenly. The man hesitated, glancing at Alyssa for direction. "Now!" Ethan repeated, his voice like steel. The man descended the stairs quickly, brushing past Ethan without a word. Ethan didn't follow him to the door, didn't even watch him leave. His attention was entirely focused on Alyssa. When the door clicked shut, the silence between them was deafening. "How long?" Ethan asked, his voice low but sharp. Alyssa looked down, unable to meet his gaze. "Ethan, please, let me explain. How?" "Long," Ethan repeated, his voice rising. Alyssa flinched, tears welling in her eyes. 6 months, she whispered. Ethan felt like the air had been knocked out of him. 6 months. Half a year of lies, of deceit, of betrayal. "Why?" he asked, his voice trembling with a mix of anger and heartbreak. "Why would you do this to us?" Alyssa finally looked up, her expression desperate. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said. It just happened. We've been so distant, Ethan. You're always working, always focused on your projects. I felt invisible." Ethan laughed bitterly, shaking his head. "So your solution was to sneak a man into our home? To bring him into our bedroom while I was downstairs working to provide for this family? I didn't plan it," Alyssa said, her voice breaking. "It just started as something small, texting, meeting for coffee. I didn't think it would go this far. But it did," Ethan said coldly. "You let it." Alyssa's tears spilled over as she reached for him, but he stepped back. "Ethan, I'm so sorry. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake. But I love you. I don't want to lose us." "You don't get to talk about love," Ethan snapped, his voice like a whip. "You destroyed it the moment you let him into our lives." The room fell silent again, the weight of their shared pain pressing down on them. Ethan stared at Alyssa, searching for any trace of the woman he had married, the woman he had trusted with everything. "I want you to leave," Ethan said finally, his voice devoid of emotion. Alyssa's eyes widened. "What?" "You heard me," Ethan said. "Pack a bag and go. I need time to think, to figure out if there's even anything left to salvage." "But Ethan, where would I go?" Alyssa pleaded. "This is my home too, our home." Ethan's eyes hardened. "You should have thought of that before you brought someone else into it." Alyssa sobbed as she retreated to the bedroom. Ethan listened to the sound of drawers opening and closing, her muffled cries filling the silence. When she finally emerged, a small suitcase in hand, Ethan didn't look at her. He stared at the floor, his hands clenched into fists. "I'll give you time," Alyssa said, her voice trembling. "But please, Ethan, don't shut me out forever." Ethan didn't respond. He waited until the door closed behind her before sinking onto the couch, his head in his hands. The house felt emptier than ever, the echoes of betrayal lingering in every corner. Ethan knew the road ahead would be long and painful. But for now, he needed space to breathe, to think, and to decide if forgiveness was even an option. The house felt hollow after Alyssa left. Ethan sat in the dimly lit living room, staring at nothing, the sound of the clock ticking louder than he'd ever noticed before. The silence was heavy, oppressive, yet oddly soothing. For the first time in months, he didn't feel the weight of pretending everything was fine. But the relief was fleeting. As the hours stretched into the early morning, the questions came. How had it gone this far without him realizing? Had there been signs he missed? Or had Alyssa been that skilled at hiding her betrayal? And then the most painful thought of all, was any of it my fault? The next day, Ethan threw himself into work. His tech company had been his refuge for years, a place where logic and structure ruled over the chaos of human emotion. He spent hours tweaking algorithms, refining code, anything to keep his mind occupied. But the distraction was temporary. Every time he returned home, the reality of what had happened hit him all over again. The house was still full of Alyssa's things. Her clothes in the closet, her books on the shelves, even her favorite mug sitting on the kitchen counter. Ethan couldn't bring himself to touch any of it. Instead, he avoided those reminders, spending most of his time in his office or the garage. One evening, as Ethan sat at his desk, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Alyssa. "Alyssa, I know you're still hurt, and I don't expect you to forgive me anytime soon. But I'm hoping we can talk soon. Please let me know when you're ready." Ethan stared at the message for a long time, his emotions warring inside him. He didn't reply. Days turned into weeks. Alyssa continued to reach out, sending messages that ranged from apologetic to pleading. She left voicemails, each one more emotional than the last, but Ethan ignored them all. Instead, he focused on himself. He started running in the mornings, a habit he hadn't kept up with since the early days of their marriage. The physical exertion helped clear his mind, giving him a temporary reprieve from the constant loop of thoughts and memories. He also began spending more time with his older brother, Mark. Mark had always been the no-nonsense type, unafraid to call things as he saw them. When Ethan finally told him about Alyssa's betrayal, Mark's response was characteristically blunt. "She's not worth your time," Mark said over beers in his backyard. "You deserve better than someone who'd treat you like that." "I don't know if it's that simple," Ethan admitted, staring at the fire pit between them. "We've been together for 10 years. I can't just erase that." "You don't have to erase it," Mark said. "But you don't have to let it define you either. She made her choice, Ethan. Now it's your turn to make yours." Mark's words stuck with Ethan. He began to think more critically about what he wanted, not just from Alyssa but from his life as a whole. One night, as he went through the security footage again, something he'd done more times than he cared to admit, he found himself asking a different question. Why did I stay quiet the first time? The answer came slowly, painfully. Because deep down, he had been afraid of the truth. The next day, Ethan decided it was time to stop running from that truth. He called Alyssa. Her voice broke with emotion when she answered. "Ethan," she said, "I've been waiting to hear from you. Can we talk? Please?" "I'll meet you," Ethan said. "But not here. I'll text you the place." They met at a quiet park on the outskirts of town, far from any familiar faces. Alyssa looked tired. "Do you believe that once a cheater, always a cheater? Write in the comments." Her face pale and drawn, but her eyes lit up when she saw him. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice trembling. Ethan didn't respond immediately. He gestured to a nearby bench, and they sat down, the awkward silence stretching between them. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," Ethan began finally, his tone measured. "About us. About what happened. I've been thinking too," Alyssa said quickly. "And I know I made the worst mistake of my life, Ethan. I know I broke your trust, and I hate myself for it." Ethan held up a hand, stopping her. "I'm not here to rehash what you did," he said. "I already know what happened. What I want to know is why." Alyssa hesitated, her hands twisting in her lap. "I felt lost," she admitted. "Like I was just going through the motions every day. You were always working, and I didn't feel like we were connecting anymore. I know that's not an excuse, but it's the truth." Ethan's chest tightened. "And you thought sneaking around with someone else was the solution?" "I wasn't thinking," Alyssa said, her voice breaking. "I was selfish, and I let my insecurities get the better of me. But it didn't mean I stopped loving you, Ethan. I never stopped loving you." Ethan stared at her, searching her face for any sign of sincerity. "Love doesn't excuse what you did," he said quietly. "I know," Alyssa whispered, tears streaming down her face. "But I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make this right. Therapy, counseling, anything. Just tell me what to do." Ethan looked away, his emotions swirling. Part of him wanted to believe her, to hope that their marriage could be salvaged. But another part of him, the part that had watched her betrayal unfold on the security cameras, knew the damage might be too great to repair. "I need more time," Ethan said finally, his voice steady. "Time to figure out if this is something I can move past." Alyssa nodded, her expression filled with a mix of relief and sorrow. "Take all the time you need," she said softly. "I'll be here waiting, no matter how long it takes." Ethan left the park feeling both lighter and heavier. He had taken a step forward, but the road ahead was still uncertain. For now, he knew one thing. Whatever decision he made, it would be on his terms. Weeks turned into months as Ethan grappled with the aftermath of Alyssa's betrayal. She had moved out temporarily, staying with a friend while he sorted through his emotions. They communicated occasionally, mostly logistical conversations about bills and shared property. But every conversation ended with Alyssa asking the same question. "Have you made a decision?" Ethan still hadn't. The house was quieter than it had ever been. Ethan spent his evenings in the garage, working on a long-neglected project, restoring an old motorcycle he had bought years ago, but never found the time to fix. The hum of tools and the smell of grease became a sort of therapy, grounding him in something tangible while his mind wrestled with intangible questions. Why hadn't Alyssa come to him when she felt disconnected? Had he failed her in some way, or was this simply a flaw in her character, a betrayal she might have committed regardless of the state of their marriage? And most importantly, could he ever forgive her? One night, as Ethan tightened the last bolt on the motorcycle, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Alyssa. "Alyssa, I know I said I'd wait, but I need to know where we stand. If you want me to let go, I will. But if there's even a chance we can fix this, I need to know." Ethan stared at the message for a long time, his thoughts swirling. He had spent so much time trying to make sense of her actions, trying to understand how the woman he loved could have betrayed him. But now, he realized the answer didn't matter as much as the choice before him. The next morning, Ethan asked Alyssa to meet him at the house. When she arrived, she looked nervous, clutching her purse tightly as she stepped inside. "Thanks for coming," Ethan said, his tone neutral. "Of course," Alyssa said softly. "I wasn't sure if I'd hear from you again." Ethan gestured toward the living room, and they sat down on opposite ends of the couch. The distance between them felt symbolic. 10 years of marriage, now reduced to an empty space neither of them knew how to bridge. "I've been thinking a lot," Ethan began. "About us, about what happened, and about whether we can move forward." Alyssa nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. "And?" Ethan took a deep breath, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "I've come to realize that forgiveness isn't about forgetting or pretending things didn't happen. It's about choosing to move forward despite the pain." Alyssa's expression brightened slightly, hope flickering in her eyes. "Does that mean you're willing to try?" Ethan hesitated, then shook his head. "No, Alyssa. I can't do this anymore." Her face fell, and tears spilled down her cheeks. "Ethan, please. I know I hurt you, but I've been doing everything I can to make it right. Therapy, reflection. I'm not the same person I was when I made those mistakes. Can't you see that? It's not about who you are now," Ethan said gently. "It's about what you've done. Every time I look at you, I see the lies, the betrayal. I see that man in our home, in our bedroom, and I can't unsee it, Alyssa." "I've tried, but I can't." Alyssa sobbed, her head in her hands. "I don't know how to live without you," she whispered. "You'll figure it out," Ethan said softly. "And so will I. But we can't keep pretending that this is something we can fix. It's broken, Alyssa. Beyond repair." The words felt like a weight lifting from his chest, even as he saw the pain they caused her. "I'll file for divorce," Ethan said after a long pause. "We'll figure out the details, how to divide everything. But I think it's best if we both move on." Alyssa nodded slowly, her tears soaking her sleeves. "I understand," she said finally. "I hate it, but I understand." That night, after Alyssa left, Ethan sat on the porch, staring at the stars. For the first time in months, he felt a sense of peace. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be paperwork, awkward conversations, and moments of loneliness. But there would also be freedom, a chance to rebuild his life on his own terms, without the shadow of betrayal hanging over him. As he leaned back, letting the cool night air wash over him, Ethan thought about the motorcycle in the garage. It was ready to ride, a project he had finished after years of delay. Maybe it was time to take it out for a spin.